Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for coming to today's event. We're going to get started already, even though the room isn't full, because we don't want to make anyone wait who came on time. We're not going to reward the people who have decided that we have to run late. So we're going to run right on time, and we're ready to go. So again, thanks, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening, and welcome to tonight's event. On what do we do now, an evening around sexual abuse. So my name is Chani Maleki, I'll be the MC tonight. And I'll tell you about my qualifications to be here. When Remy Zippel reached out to me a couple of days ago, I asked him, I said, why do you want me to MC or moderate this event? I really don't know much about sexual abuse, and Baruch Hashem, I'm not a survivor, and I haven't been affected by this deeply. In fact, I know very, very little about the topic. And he said to me, he says, that's exactly why we think you could be a good MC and a good moderator, because this event is about demonstrating, illustrating, and educating people who are not necessarily survivors, not necessarily people who have gone through abuse, so that they can better understand, better help prevent, and better support people who have. And because of that, I felt that it was vital for me to show up today, as all of you have, to be there, not just because we're here about things that affect us personally, but also because it's important to be there for our fellow Jews, our fellow citizens, and our fellow community members when there are things that are affecting them, and we can be there to help. So it's very interesting, because I guess I've come full circle, because when the JCW website came out quite a few years ago, I was one of those, I guess you could say, conservative feeling people who wasn't so comfortable with the website, because I felt, of course I understand that this is a problem, and it's a terrible problem, but why do we have to air the dirty laundry? Why do we have to do this so publicly? And more than that, why do we have to humiliate the abusers? I'm not trying to protect them, but why humiliate them? And it took me time to finally understand that the purpose of websites like JCW wasn't to humiliate anybody. It was to create an awareness that would cause victims or survivors to realize that they can speak out, that they're not alone. And it created an awareness amongst people who were potential predators, that there was no pity, there was no tolerance, and there was no excuse for doing what they did. And I have no doubt in my mind that many, many people have been saved by the fact that websites like JCW came out. And many, many people who might have been on the edge and could have been potential predators were knocked some sense into them, where the excuses, they realized there's no room for excuses at all. And now that I don't think that JCW is in effect, or it's basically defunct as far as I understand, if I'm not correct, it's events like these that keep sexual abuse in the public consciousness. So this is going to be reported, people will see it. And that means that victims, and again, potential abusers, are going to be made aware of it. So every single one of us who have shown up tonight are actually not just showing up to hear about a topic, but we're actually doing something that creates a safer environment for our community and for the people in it. So we have a number of speakers today. Our first speaker is going to be Dr. Pearlman, Dr. Akiva Pearlman, and after that we're going to have some questions and answers. We're letting you know in advance that you can ask some questions. There'll be a number on the screen later on to let you know where you can text those questions anonymously. Also, just a quick couple of thank yous to people who have made this event and who have dedicated their lives and their days to to helping people, not just sexual abuse victims, but also, not just sexual abuse survivors, but also anybody who has mental issues or mental challenges. With the Neshamos.org or the Neshamos organization, there's now a place that you can turn to without judgment and without fear, and knowing that you're going to have an understanding and caring person on the other side to give you a hand. So a big thank you, first of all, to Meir and Chaviva Nu. Meir and Chaviva, they're the Neshamos project coordinators, and they really dedicate their lives to making sure that people who need the help and who need support are going to have it. So a big thank you to Meir and Chaviva also for putting on the event today. Big thank you. Another big thank you is to Dr. Eli and Hannah Rosen. They're the founders of and the chairman of Neshamos, and with them this whole organization might not have happened. And without them, events like this wouldn't be happening. So a big thank you to Dr. and Hannah Rosen. Also a big thank you to Avremi Zippel. Avremi Zippel was supposed to be one of the speakers today. Unfortunately, he was unable to come due to a last-minute emergency, but he was very involved in the lead up to the event and in the planning of this event. So a big thank you to Avremi as well. Okay, so moving on to the program. So I'm the son of a Rav, son of a Shliach. I grew up in Sydney, Australia. And towards my adulthood, I became aware of certain sexual abuses that were happening, or that had happened rather, in the community. And a couple of years ago, I went to my father when the whole awareness started happening in this community. And I'm sure people who are here are aware of the Royal Commission. There was a televised, very, very public, embarrassing commission that really talked and really put a spotlight on sexual abuses in not just the Jewish community, but the Jewish community got a lot of spotlight that was unusual for it. And I asked my father, I said, I mean, you were kind of aware of certain things happening in the past. Why didn't you say anything about it then? And my father said, Chani, I'll be very, very honest with you. We didn't realize. We didn't realize how devastating this was. We didn't realize how serious the problem was. We didn't realize that sexual abuse is a sickness and that you cannot just call the sexual abuser into your office and talk to them and just get them to do teshuvah. It doesn't work like that, but we didn't know that. And most of all, we didn't realize the long-term effects of sexual abuse on people who experience it, on people who survive it. We didn't realize, we just didn't know. And now that we know, we're doing something about it. And I think that a lot of credit has to be given to the Rabbanim, that now they really have stepped up to the plate, and many of them are leaders in the community who are advocating and speaking out for the protection and the support of survivors. So one of these Rabbanim is a Rav we have with us today, the Rav of the community, Mar Asra, Rabbi Braun, who many years ago said the following, and I'm quoting. He says, the consensus of poskim today is that if someone has a reasonable suspicion that a child or children are being or have been abused, abuse being defined as any action or failure to act that can cause physical or emotional harm, they are not only permitted to report the suspect to the authorities, but indeed should do so without delay in order to protect those vulnerable children from abuse. And this is not Mesira. And it's really appreciated that Rabbi Braun not only paskins this way, but openly advocates for survivors by taking the time from his busy schedule to be here today. Rabbi Braun.
Thank you, Chani. Former Talmud. I guess you can never say former about a Talmud. This is one of the most difficult speaking engagements that I've ever had. And it's not the subject matter. It's the fact that there's a wide range of audiences that are listening to us, both here and on Zoom. And among the audiences, I should say, there are victims, or more correctly, survivors. There are different types of victims that react very differently. There are potential victims, there are caretakers of victims, and there are even predators. And the message to each of these groups or categories of people is so different. I'm going to try my best in the short few minutes that we have tonight to say whatever we can for as many of these people possible. Initially, I was thinking, why did they ask me to speak? We're going to hear tonight from professionals. We're going to hear, well, I don't know if it's still on schedule, from survivors. What can I add to this conversation? And I believe that I've been asked to speak in order to present the angle of Torah. What's the Torah position on this matter? But before that, I have a personal story to share. My story is the story of being a listening ear to so many people over the years on this topic. Even just in the very last few days since the promotion of this event, I've had many people approach me, and each one with a different story. These are stories of raw emotion, which can't be put into words by anyone other than those who experienced it. And they too have difficulty in putting words to their very deep feelings. The emotional turmoil, the challenges, the deep suffering beyond anything we can imagine. And then there are stories of courage and of hope. And I've also heard from predators and seen the evil in their eyes, the machinations, manipulations, and more, their sickness. I can tell you one thing. Tonight, we've reached a milestone. We've come a very, very long way. Our community had its own share of challenges. There were issues, as was mentioned earlier, of lack of awareness and understanding. There were cover-ups, etc. Why? Even the flyers of tonight's event are no longer up on Kingston Avenue. I admit that could be due to natural forces of wind, but maybe also external forces. Either way, we are long past that. Tonight, we are uniting as one. We're going to be dealing with this in an open and honest and mature manner. We know, and we always knew this, that truth, tzedek, and yosher will ultimately prevail. I have 3 messages that I want to share with you tonight. Number 1, I want to reiterate the message that was just said earlier and was stated publicly by the Bezdin and by Rabbanim all over the world. It is absolutely clear, al pi Torah, that one has to do everything in their power to prevent abuse from taking place. The Pischei Teshuva writes, and I'll quote him in the original Hebrew, Kol sifrei musar mar'ishim al lashon hara. All the books of Musar make a lot of noise about the Aved of lashon hara. V'anoichi marish ha'olam, but I am storming up the world, storming and making a lot of noise, al avon gadol mizeh umatzu yoser, on a greater sin which is much more common. And the sin is menias asme miladaber b'makim shenitzrach lahatzal ashuk, to withhold from speaking when it's necessary in order to prevent those that have been wronged. In the Torah, loisei lechrachel and loisamed al dam re'echa, do not speak, gossip, and do not stand idly by when the blood of your brother is being spilled, are juxtaposed one near each other. To teach us that loisei lechrachel is true. We're not going to gossip, and we need to learn a lot about that too. But provided that when you're stopping from saying gossip, you're not standing idly by when there's blood being spilled. According to halacha, an abuser is considered a roidif during the time of the attack, a pursuer, and all the severe prohibitions of mesira do not apply when there's evidence of abuse. One is not allowed to remain silent. That's point number 1. Let's go past that. Point number 2. to all the victims and survivors out there. What I want to tell you tonight is you are holy in both body and soul. The Zohar writes, Gufa delhoin kadishin, nishmasa delhoin kadishin, our bodies and our souls are all holy. No one has the ability to contaminate and defile your body. You are not damaged goods. Nothing can be done to take away your essential worth and value in the eyes of Hashem. What was done to you is absolutely assault on every level. And yes, you are not at fault. You never consented, there's no such thing. In the language of the Gemara, pitui ktana oinasu. Seducing a child is not considered seduction, it's considered rape. There are evil people in this world, but no one can actually violate your true essence. The Gemara tells us, "Hasoiter lo yoshel chaveroi keilu soiter pnei shchina." If somebody slaps the cheek of someone else, it's as if he's slapping Hashem in his face. Or the pasuk says, "Hanegea bechem." If somebody touches another Jew, "Kinogea bevaves eini," is touching the apple of Hashem's eye. I once heard a beautiful vart. The halacha is if somebody lifts up a hand to another Yid, he's considered a rasha. He's considered a wicked person. So the question is asked, where do we find that a person gets punished if he didn't do the act yet? In Torah we know that machshav ra, a negative thought, ein HaKadosh Baruch Hu mitzaref l'maisa, a negative thought is never considered action. We get rewarded for good thoughts, but we don't get punished for the negative thought unless it results in action. Why do we say if you lift up your hand to someone else, you're already considered a rasha? And the answer is because there's one exception to that rule. There's one particular type of thought where the Eibishter punishes for thought just like action. It's based on a pasuk, "L'man tfoises b'nei Yisrael b'libam," the thought of Avodah Zarah. When you lift up a hand to another Yid, you're slapping Hashem. That's Avodah Zarah. And Avodah Zarah thought is already a problem. These individuals have abused Hashem himself. But Hashem is untouchable even after the abuse, and so are you. And finally, point number 3. There are steps that can be taken. There is hope. There are prevention methods. There are things that can be done. The Gemara tells us, "Ein apetrapis la'arayis," no one is immune to immorality. One has to take safeguards in every situation, regardless of the individual's stature and standing. The Rambam brings, the Shulchan Aruch brings that the Gedolei HaTanoim Ameroim, the greatest Tanoim, said about themselves, "Hizaharu bi mipnei biti." Watch me so I shouldn't stumble and do the wrong thing with my very own daughter. And if they ask that safeguards should be put in place to protect themselves, how much more so for us? Lefum gam l'shichna, the load is according to the camel. Hashem never asks us anything beyond what we can do. Lefikoiche shaladam. And therefore, if Hashem is not demanding something that we can't do, obviously there are steps that can be taken, both to prevent and both afterwards as well. And you'll hear about those things tonight, and Hashem should crown all our efforts with hatzlacha. We hope and pray we should come to the time of Esruch Hatuma Avim in Eretz, where the spirit of impurity, of defilement will be removed from the face of the earth, and will be a time of only goodness and kindness. We won't even know what the concept of abuse means in the time of Mashiach. B'mheira v'yameinu take from yad mamish.
Thank you very, very much, Rabbi Braun. And again, it's just extremely encouraging to know that the Rabbanim and the leaders of this community are actively supportive and encouraging this cause. We're now going to move on to our keynote speaker today, who is Dr. Akiva Pearlman. Akiva Pearlman is a PhD, a professor, and a lecturer on topics of abuse, addiction, and trauma, and a fellow traveler for those suffering in silence. He has educated nearly 1,000 frum social workers from our community and is currently serving as a professor at the Wurzeiler School of Social Work. Dr. Pearlman is the clinical director of ODA's Wellness Center, a clinic that serves the Hasidic community in Williamsburg. He maintains a practice in Fresh Meadows, where he resides with his wife Tamar and children, And he's going to be talking about the different ways that abuse affects the people who experience it, and what healing looks like, and how we can be part of the solution. Dr. Akiva Pearlman. And I should say before he speaks that we will have right afterwards some questions and answers. And if you would like to ask any questions, please see the number on the screens where you can text anonymously, and we'll be happy to present some of those questions at the end of this talk. Dr. Pearlman.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a great honor. Troubling times. Certainly the past month, our people have suffered a great deal. The suffering, the voices of the victims, of the survivors, they've just been bleeding, they've been crying. When you have an event, and I think it's important to speak about it, when you have an event where a character within our community who's an advocate for children, for safety, and then it's discovered and revealed some horrific atrocities. And then when a community responds, at least in the beginning, thankfully I think we turned the corner, but when a community responds with these are statements of you can't speak about Lashon Hara, where the dialogue becomes about what is considered acceptable in terms of language and whether or not we should own a book. It's a complete disgrace to the individuals who are suffering. And what ultimately represents a real misunderstanding of who these people are and where they come from. And today, like any other time I have an opportunity to speak about something like this, I first and foremost, I turn to the people dearest to me, the people I've had an opportunity to work with for many years. And I ask them, I'd like to share your story. Because I believe that if we know the story of a person who's suffering, it simply changes the way we approach them. It changes the way we think. It changes the way we look at the world, and it provides a great amount of opportunity and space for healing. And of course, we need to deal with these issues. We do. We need to deal with issues like Lashon Hara, what's acceptable, what's not. But that's not the dialogue in this story. This is a story of people suffering in silence, and suffering in darkness. And I think most of us can relate to this on some level. We know what it's like to be alone. We know what it's like to feel disconnected from people. But imagine we take that feeling and we amplify it 1,000 times. We might begin to understand what it's like to suffer in such a dark, lonely, frightening space. And the brave people who've come forward. I read a letter recently for a woman who as a child was a victim of this man. And she shared, and the bravery at the end of it was amazing. She shared her story, but she then signed her name at the bottom, identifying herself as a person that you can notice in the street, in the store. She's one of the bravest people I know. Because if one thing we're going to learn about this experience that people have is it causes you to run away in hiding, to run from the world, to run from yourself. And here she is revealing herself, saying, I'm not afraid. I'm a survivor. As the Rav was saying a few minutes ago, that my essence, my being is still intact. Yes, it's a little bit broken, it's a little bit fractured, but I'm still here. And this past month, as someone who works with so many individuals who've had this experience, the victims and the survivors, one after the next, just shared their devastation with me. They said, how am I supposed to share my story with anybody if this is the reaction of our neighbors? Sitting at a Shabbos table, and instead of talking about the essence of the issue, it becomes about something else. How am I supposed to come forward? Around a week before this event, not this event, but the event that kind of shook our community a great deal, there was a beautiful couple that I met with. There was this woman who was recently married, and as we know, with many people, that often is a time where this issue begins to emerge, often because there's safety for the first time, and they're also revisiting in a very, very different way, a very traumatic space that they've lived in. But there was this beautiful couple, a very supportive husband, an understanding husband, whose wife literally visited the depths of hell for a long time. And finally, she was getting ready. She was preparing herself to speak to her family, to speak to her parents, to share that story. And she called me a week afterwards, after it broke, and she said, I just can't. Considering and listening to people's reactions, I can't. And that mandate, that statement becomes a part of all of our needs and all of our responses. We need to understand that for this issue to be dealt with, it includes all of us stepping up to the plate, all of us noticing that we all play a part. When you turned a blind eye, you turned away from some form of suffering. One way or another, we simply contribute to it. And this is an issue that lives in the darkness. And we need to bring light into this space. And that's our job. That's all of our jobs. It's not just the individuals who are close to that suffering. It's not just the families. It's about creating an environment, a culture, a community that has language about, I understand you, I see you. I have no need to run from you. Let me create space for you. So we fix these issues by revealing it, by doing the opposite of what it does to us in general, which is closes us up and allows us and thrusts us into our own internal darkness. And we need to create a world that's safe for people to emerge. And we know that we're successful, and we know that we're gaining more success because more and more people are developing that strength. So I want to first talk a little bit about the picture of abuse. What does it look like? And give us just a little sense of often a different picture than what we like to think. I remember when I was a kid, they used to have, every once in a while, they'd have some type of program, even within the frum environment. And those programs often mimicked what we would call this initiative called stranger danger, where they would sort of send home a flyer or some type of speech in school saying, you have to be wary that there are some creepy people in vans. They show up with lollipops, and they try to bring you into that space. And the message really was at the time that it's them. There's some force on the outside that is going to harm us, and we need to protect ourselves from that. Stay away from creepy people in a van. That was the primary message that we walked away with. And I still remember as a child being afraid of vans, simply because that's what I was told the creepy people lived. And then once we started paying attention to the research, and we started paying attention to the lived experience, the stories of people, we realized that the story is very, very different. And there's a reason why we couldn't see the truth. There's a wonderful researcher and a therapist. She was a neo-Freudian therapist, a wonderful contributor to our profession, Alice Miller. And she shared a concept which remains true to this day, even though it was said many years ago, where she said the darker a phenomenon is, the more likely we are to need to protect ourselves from it and deny its existence. When something is really hard to look at, we have two options. We either stare it down and we face it, or we simply pretend like it doesn't exist. And when you look back at all those programs of stranger danger, that was our collective unconscious saying, we can't see the truth. We're not ready for the truth. And slowly, slowly, we're getting closer and closer to that space. But one thing we know in terms of statistics, that it's not about strangers. It's not about people we don't know. More than 90% of victims, the family knows the abuser. Not only that, generally speaking, the family is safe with the abuser. They're comfortable enough to place a child in the care of that individual because they're close, because they're safe. And when we think about this in just slightly a different way, think about what this means. When you're with a safe person, you're a child or even an adolescent, and you're with an adult that's supposed to be in your life to provide safety, that your family trusts and you trust. And that's how you develop a sense of trust in the world. That's how you learn how to trust a Rabbi. That's how you learn how to trust our Masorah. And it's that pathway. It's that individual, it's that person who's so close to you that shatters your world. It's not an experience that you visit. It becomes a part of the way you experience the world. How are you supposed to look at authority when an authority character or authority figure in your life, someone you're supposed to trust, has violated that? How do you start to rebuild a world that is so close to your home? We know that, and this is a little darker, that 30% of abused children are abused by their own family members. Now, I know that often elicits a great deal of paranoia and fear, but there's one thing we need to not do, is run from this problem. This is a problem that once we develop a language with it, and we create a space where we could communicate effectively about it, and speak to our children in a way that's not frightening to them, and it's a way that's empowering, and it's not at all about anything inappropriate. It's about protection and security and safety. Once we find that, we don't need to be afraid. You get questions all the time. What do I need to be afraid of? What do I need to look out for? And I said, if you're communicating with your child and you're empowering your child to communicate with you, And they get to the point where they say, yes, Ma, Dad, I get it. I know, I've internalized your message. You don't need to be nearly as afraid as when you're trying to manage symptoms from the outside. We need to treat this with language. We need to treat this with light. And light is an evening like tonight. I can't tell you, and I'm sure, and I know this, anytime I'm in a position like this, I know that in this crowd, we have many survivors. And I know that they must feel like seeing a group of people, their neighbors, their friends, their community members coming out on an evening like this to let them know that their voices could be heard. And the voice of a victim, the voice of a survivor is often a whisper, a very, very faint whisper. It's not loud. But when you have an event like this and you bring it out into the open, you reveal it, it provides a great deal of healing, even if they can't talk about it. They at least know. They look around and they say, there are people that I know that are here. Maybe there's an opportunity for me to begin to share it. It's not them. It's us. This is not an outside phenomenon. This is internal. And we know that when you look at the research that's done in the secular world, not in the Jewish world, we have very limited research within our community, but we're getting better at it. We know that generally speaking, around 40% of victims will actually share their story with a person, often throughout the course of their lifetime. And that's what we're talking about in the external world. Think about the shame for a moment. What does that mean that 40% of people will be brave enough to share their story with somebody else? 60% of people will take this experience with them forever. They'll just simply hold on to it. They won't have the opportunity to share it with anybody else. Let's talk a little bit about what we call healthy development, what it looks like, a healthy form of self. And I find that if we do that, we could contrast it to this experience itself. We know that when we talk about like the loss of suffering, the loss of abuse, what did it actually take away from us? So let's focus on what does healthy look like. We know this, the child comes into the world. They're unconditionally loved by us, by the world, by Hashem. They're a gift. They're given to us. And we look at them and we know there are two different ways, two primary ways to look at a child. You either look at a child for the being that they are. You look into their eyes, you look into their soul, and you say, you were given to me as a gift. I'm going to raise you to become the best version of yourself. I see you. You're not only a reflection of me, you're your own entity. You're beautiful, you're perfect, you're exactly the way you're supposed to be. And we infuse that energy into their being, into their soul. And they take that with them. It's that feeling. When you look at the research, it's a phenomenal thing. When we talk about attachment, which is an idea that we're started speaking about more recently publicly, the development of attachment takes place the very early years of life. Even before someone could speak, before they could think on their own, before they could share their own ideas. It's during that time of life where they're infused with a sense of self. We give them permission to be, permission to feel safe, permission to feel comfortable. And by doing so, they could take that feeling with them throughout the world. And we all know life is not so simple. Everyone's going to be hit every once in a while. Everyone's going to be knocked down. The ones that stand up are the ones that have the self. Children who are not looked at for what they are, but instead, when you look at them, you see them as a reflection of yourself. I need you to act in a certain way so that way everybody's going to look at me well. You're going to be my mirror. Instead of you being your own entity, that child walks around with a great sense of insecurity. But what happens when you have a child who that essence, that part of their being that gives them a sense of safety, gives them a sense of being and security, is really taken away from them? Where instead of feeling I'm good, I'm capable, I could accomplish, I have what to offer, instead of that being their internal experience, they're left with a shame or belief that they're bad, they're unworthy, and they're unlovable. That person is left with shame. Shame is the primary experience that that individual walks around with, and it primarily dominates their life. I was just speaking with someone today. This is a conversation I had today. It was deeply painful. Someone I work with who's a profound survivor. She doesn't even know how beautiful she is. The rest of the world does. As an adult, she brings healing into the world. She's loving, she's good, she's kind, she's thoughtful, she's respectful. But her own inner being, she can't see any of that. It's almost completely disconnected. She sees herself as a shameful, broken person. And she was sharing with me as this event is unraveling and she's making her way into the suffering, into the trauma that she's encountered. She said, I can't When I take a shower, I can't even wash myself. I can't wash my own body. It's too dirty. It doesn't deserve to be cleaned. I don't have the ability to clean myself. I'm deserving of the dirt. The self, the part of the person, which says, all of us, we know what that's like. We get in the shower, we clean ourselves, we feel like human beings. For a person to feel that my being is unworthy of that, of feeling decent, of feeling clean, of feeling serene, it's lost from that individual. It's gone. And that was something that was taken away, something that the person didn't stand a chance. And we need to understand a little bit of that, where that shame was created, where you're treated like an object. You're not treated like a person. You're not a person who has feelings, thoughts, and ideas and hopes for themselves, but rather you're simply an object. I remember a client asked me, and she was abused by an uncle for many, many years, and he loved her, and he would always say he loved her. And he would give her gifts, and he would treat her special, and her parents would even make fun of their relationship from the outside. They didn't know what was going on the inside. And I remember her primary concern at some point where she said, the one question I have that I'll never be able to answer is, did he even see me as a person? Did he even know who I was? Or was I simply an object to him? Is that it? And that, to her, that's what she's grappling with. She's actually stuck with that question. Shame, like we're speaking about, is when a person has their powerlessness regularly held in front of them so they can't escape the feeling. Their powerlessness is right in front of them. One of the most powerful stories I was ever a part of. There was a beautiful program in Brooklyn called The Living Room. I worked there for many years with a wonderful friend of mine, Menachem Poznansky, the director of the program. And we ran a program for kids in recovery, boys and girls, men and women who suffered through addiction. I don't need to say this out loud, but obviously the overwhelming majority of them had a history of sexual abuse, which we know to be the case. We'll share that a little bit later. But this is a group of people that have been harmed and wounded and broken on the inside. And we decided we're going to make a Shabbaton. They're in recovery. Let's treat them with respect. So we went. I grew up in Farakaway. We had an area over there. And we really went all out. We got people to invest and to give us an opportunity to treat this crowd with a great deal of respect. The best food we could get. We even put up a tent. It was nice outdoors. And we're sitting there Friday night, this beautiful, serene Suda. And one of the members of the group runs into the tent and says, "My abuser is walking up the block." And you could imagine the power of that moment. Here you have a group of people that they've spent much of their lives running from their pain through one form of addiction or another. And here they are getting better. They're getting healthier. And I was terrified for this abuser. My greatest fear was they're going to literally walk over to this man and kill him. Because it was, even though it was their friend's story, but it was also their story. This was all of theirs. It was a collective story that they shared. And I ran ahead. I saw this man walking up the block, and I see this mob, literally of 100. These are around 20-year-olds, around average, I'd say, sort of like this bravado, this sense of self, about to kill this guy. And they're walking towards him. And I walked over to the guy and said, "Listen, do me a favor. I don't know who you are. I don't know anything. Just turn around and walk the other way. There's a person here who is apparently very hurt by you. They're coming here. They're going to hurt you. Just walk away." And with his own sense of lunacy, he said, "No, I'm standing my ground." And he continued walking. I said, "Okay, I warned you. I did my part." And as they walked, you see this bravado slowly dissipate. It slowly began to fade away. And by the time they had that direct encounter with this man, most of them barely had the opportunity or ability even to speak. They couldn't even scream at him. They couldn't share anything, let alone hit him. At a certain point, I was hoping, someone please hit the man. Someone do something. Find your inner strength. Fight back. And it was in that moment that I saw they didn't have it. The inner strength was taken. And that was like the darkest night, possibly of my career. It was myself and a few other people that were there. We spent the entire night sitting with this group, one after the next, sharing their story, reviewing it with one another. But at the end of the day, there was nothing left to fight. They couldn't even stand up to protect themselves because it was taken. That shame slowly, the powerlessness that they felt in their childhood reemerged in the face of someone who harmed them. Shame is when a person is forced to experience something that they are not yet ready to experience. We go through developmental stages. There are certain times in our life where we accomplish and we're tasked to do different things. When you're a child, you are not tasked to engage in any form of sexuality whatsoever. You don't even understand it. You don't understand how it operates. You don't understand what it means to you. It's not a part of your stage of development. And when you introduce something to a person who has no clue or understanding what's happening to them in that moment, it completely deprives them of the moment and of their future. They lose that sensibility, they lose their sense of self in that space. It's an unfortunate reality that we need to speak about. But when people are abused, obviously it's a minority, but when people are abused and they don't understand what's happening to them, there's a phenomenon that is fairly common enough, where those people, because of their lack of understanding of what's taking place, will often engage in a reenactment. Well, they'll then go and do it to somebody else to try to make sense of their own experience. They don't know what's happening to them. I'm dealing now with a young man, one of the bravest men I know, who in his own time of abuse where he was being harmed, he himself harmed another child, slightly younger than him. And it's at this moment, this juncture in his life, as he's making his way through his own healing, where he's taking absolute responsibility for what he did to another. He harmed someone, and he knows what that harm feels like, because now he could feel it. But he says, when he goes back, he says, I didn't even understand what I was doing. I didn't even have a desire. I was a child. I didn't know what was going on. But we understand this reenactment. We get it. We understand it from a psychological perspective. People are trying to make sense of something they can't understand. And in that moment, they engage in something that what they believe will hopefully give them some type of clarity. What's happening to me? Why are certain things occurring? And then they engage in the same thing, and it's something that people ultimately need to begin to own. And often this is the later stage of the process. After they make their way through their own, they need to ultimately take accountability for what they may have done to somebody else. Shame is created when your essence, your most private part of your being, is taken advantage of. And in that space, it leaves you without anyone really to trust. And again, this becomes a part of you. This is no longer an external story. You hear so many people ask the same question over and over again. And again, it's a question that is simply ignorant because they haven't sat down and had a conversation with someone who shared their experience with them. Where they ask that question, I understand many things happen to us. There are people who are hit. There are people who get into accidents. Why is this so lingering? Why is this a part of them? And what they fail to see is that during these early stages of our lives, we're developing our sense of self. And in that space, when the message becomes that instead of something bad happened to me, the shame causes us to internalize a message of, I am bad. Not something bad happened to me, but me, personally. My personhood is bad. And to take a moment to think what that means. Most of us, we all encounter things. We all have our own shame. We do things we're not supposed to do. We hurt people we don't want to hurt. We make mistakes in our own space of life. We say things that we ultimately regret. But then we can make our way through the next day because we say we're sorry, we move on. It doesn't make its way to our core. But when you, the essence of your being, is bad, when you are flawed, everything that you do, everything that you see, everything that you encounter is sort of masked with that, it's tarnished by that light. I remember there was a case with this young man. He suffered so much. He lived in a very isolated community, and he was abused repeatedly, which unfortunately is another part of the reality. That very often when someone's abused by one, they're much more likely to abuse by another. And when we understand it through this lens, we can begin to make sense of that. Because when a person feels shattered, it's not like they're looking for it, but someone who's looking to harm someone. When I worked with abusers, there was a statement that they would often say. I spent a couple of years working with people who would molest others. It wasn't the easiest time in my life, but they all would make the same statement. They would say, we could walk into a classroom and we could pick out the vulnerable children. We don't need to hear from them. We don't need to talk to them. We just need to look into their eyes. And we could pick someone out who's like that. So if someone who's been harmed this way, there's something in their eyes which tells them, which tells others that I'm hurting, I'm in pain. And they're noticed. They're noticed by those who are looking for individuals like that. And this young man made his way into that world. He was harmed so much. And he said, I discovered that the only way I'd get attention is by making my way out into the world. and people taking advantage of me. And he said I would actually go out at night and wait for people to harm me. He lived in this very isolated place where it was possible for this to happen. And I asked myself when I heard that story, like, where was I? Where were we? That here's this young boy making his way into the streets in the darkness because he believes he deserves something like this. What part of my own being did I not allow to see that there's someone who's hurting out there and we need to notice it? And that's something we need to start opening our eyes to this. We can't be bystanders who are simply observing something that's bad and then just move on with our lives. We all notice suffering, but how often do we go and encounter it? How often do we go to that person and say, I see you, I notice you, I'm here with you, it matters to me? And he was a man who would say, I remember I was doing therapy with him and it was like kind of stuck. And I was trying to ask myself over and over again, like, what's happening here? We developed the trust, we developed a connection, we're trying to move forward. And I asked him, like, what's happening? And he said, I'm simply waiting for you to abuse me. He goes, I don't trust that you're not going to hurt me. And that became the essence of our work, the idea that it's possible for him to trust someone else. So the inability to ask for help in that space, and the shame becomes this internalized core belief, I am bad, my essence is bad, I am helpless. And every child, we know this, who's bad? Is it even possible to say this about a child? Is it even possible to say this about an adult who's suffering so much? Yet these are individuals that's the only thing they ever say to themselves. It's the only internalized message that they have to live with. And the unfortunate reality, we know this, there are many concepts that we could reflect on, but psychic determinism is a Freudian idea which basically says if someone is hurting, it's going to manifest one way or another. And that's something we need to know, that pain emerges in the world. When we're suffering in silence, there's only so much of our beings that we could just quench and try to hide. Eventually it begins to boil up, and it begins to emerge. There's a beautiful statement by Braun, just wanted to read it. She says, a deep sense of love and belonging is an irreducible need of all people. We are biologically, cognitively, physically, and spiritually wired to love, to be loved, and to belong. When those needs are not met, we don't function as we were meant to. We break, we fall apart, we numb, we ache, we hurt others, and we get sick. That's the inevitable reality of this experience. It's not an experience that you move past and then life becomes cheery. It's an experience where then you feel threatened and ultimately you hurt yourself and you hurt others. One of the studies that we turn to make sense of this is one of my favorite studies, the ACE study, the Adverse Childhood Experience study, which has been replicated thousands of times at this point. So at least we know it to be true. And it's one of the simplest studies done. 10 questions with a yes or a no. No complicated anything. Just one piece of paper. And they ask, did you suffer as a child, one form or another? Were you in a home where you were beaten? Were you in a home where you were neglected? Was there sexual abuse in your life? And every time you say yes, that's your score. A score of 1, a score of 2, a score of 4. And the one thing that we know that people who suffered in this way, we could actually track it. And it's not 10 times more likely to struggle with an addiction when someone goes through something like this. It's not 10 times more likely for a person to develop self-harming and self-defeating behaviors and attitudes. It is 4,762 times more likely. And when you think about what those numbers mean, you're not talking about a minor number, double the chance of somebody else. You're talking about a number that is phenomenally different than the rest of the population of the world. The world is different for these individuals, and they're looking to provide some type of healing for themselves. And because that's not available to them, often they then need to find some type of way to numb or escape. I did my own research when you look at the world of the at-risk population within our firm community, and there are many programs. I remember I did some work in a program here. I forget what it was called. You probably remember. Rabbi Fagan, if I'm not mistaken. Fagelin. Yeah, but there was a program, I don't know if it's still running. Remember, I used to run groups. There was a story, just want to share one story from that group. It was a group of at-risk boys. And it taught me something so beautiful about what it means to have a Rebbe in your life. And these were kids, most of them were no longer religious. Most of them were out of the system. And I remember there was one week where someone mentioned something in the group, and this one kid, and then the whole group, they all turned their eyes towards this one kid, and they said, tell him the story about the picture. And the guy was like all embarrassed, and he said, okay, and he tells the story, puffs up his chest, and he gets all ready. And again, you have to imagine these group of boys, they're a little bit broken. They're not feeling good about themselves, they're not feeling connected, a bit downtrodden. So when someone sits up straight, you pay attention. And he tells a story. He said, when I was younger, I went to visit the Rabbi, and one time I made something in my class. I made I think it was out of noodles. He made a picture frame out of noodles that he painted. Something very basic, something very simple. And when he went to see the Rebbe, he tells the story with the greatest amount of pride and the greatest sense of like purpose and meaning in his life. And he said, and I gave it as a gift. And he said he came back later, I don't know how long later, and he saw that the picture, that the picture frame was then used. It was a picture of someone, maybe it was the Rebbeson, I forget who it was, that was then put into this little handmade picture frame that this kid made. And he was sharing that story with the greatest amount of pride. And it taught me something so deep, where here's this kid completely disconnected from Yiddishkeit at that moment, but he still had a Rebbe. And I don't know where this boy is today, but I'm pretty certain that he's doing okay. The only reason why I know that is because he had a Rebbe. And if you have a Rebbe, you're doing okay. If you have someone in your life that's there with you, that's connected. And I've seen many, many different communities, and there's so few that actually hold on to that sense. They get lost. But I did my own research going back, and I reached out to all the directors of these programs for these at-risk kids, and I asked them, what's the percentage of your population that was sexually abused? And I was only asking about sexual abuse. I wasn't talking about neglect. I wasn't talking about anything else, just pure sexual abuse. The lowest number I got from any one of these programs was 60%. That was the lowest. The highest number I got was one particular program where the female population was in 90%. The average was around 75%. So when we talk about this idea that pain presents itself somehow. Pain manifests in the world. When you're living with a fractured sense of self, it's very hard to wake up in the morning. You need to find ways in order for you to sort of live that way. And we need to look at it differently, acting out for these individuals, which often is pretty typical. We talk about, borderline personality disorder. We give it a name, but we don't mention that borderline personality disorder has rates of sexual abuse that are well into the 80, 90 percentile range, especially for women. So we're not just talking about a disorder someone's born with. We're talking about a reaction. It's simply a reaction. When someone's relationships, someone's hope has been tarnished, those individuals need to find some way to comfort themselves. And acting out serves as a solution to the problem. That's not the problem. When a person is acting out in a way where they're trying to cope, they're trying to survive, that's a solution for them. It's not the problem. I remember I was working with a young man, and it was early on in my career trying to understand the phenomenon of addiction. And addiction and trauma, they're interconnected phenomena. And I was trying to understand it. And there's this young boy, he happened to be, he was a Jewish boy, wasn't religious at the time. He's actually religious today. And I asked him, he was using heroin. I think we know what heroin's a pretty powerful drug. It's a drug that causes a great deal of deaths in our country. And I asked him, I said, could you explain to me, what is this like? What's it like to do it? I've never used heroin. I hear a lot of things about it, but I don't know what the experience is like. And I was expecting him to go in some physiological direction, talk about how much comfort it feels, how good, how high he gets, the euphoria of it. That was my anticipation. And instead, he shared the story. He said, when I used heroin for the first time, I felt as though the world was hugging me. I felt contained. I felt love. I felt a sense of belonging to something. And if you were to hear this man's life, what he went through, you'd begin to understand why that became his hug. The absence of hugs, the absence of acceptance. The need doesn't go away. The need remains the same. But if you don't know how to get it in a normative manner, you're going to find some way to get it. Gabor Mate, who's a researcher on trauma and addiction, he shares a line. He says, it's impossible to understand risky behavior without asking what relief the person finds or hopes to find in the risky or addictive behavior. Don't just focus on the behavior. Focus on the intention. What is the relief that this individual is seeking? And we have to look at that function as opposed to something else. Instead of looking at an individual and getting upset and frustrated and angry, why are you doing this behavior? Why don't we ask the other question? What pain are you in? What's your suffering? Tell me your story that brought you to such a place. There's got to be a story. There's always a story. I've never met a single addict who doesn't have a story. This is not something that just happens one day. The story always remains the same, and we're talking about this phenomenon. So when we talk about our role, abuse is physical, the experience is physical, but ultimately manifests in shame, aloneness, and helplessness. Carl Rogers, the wonderful psychologist, he says in healing, it's much more about being than it is about doing. When you think about our role, what's our job, what's our responsibility and mandate when it comes to addressing a phenomenon like this? It's not so much about doing something. It's about becoming somebody different, allowing yourself to see the world in a different way, allowing yourself to understand that there's a phenomenon that manifests in a physical way, but all the symptoms have nothing to do with anything physical. Of course, people suffer in physical ways too, but it's something much deeper, it's spiritual, it's emotional. And we need to become a people that could receive that. We're not afraid of the darkness. We look at it, we face it down, and we say, I understand you. I get where you're coming from. I understand what it's like to live in that place, and how can we create a world where there's a little bit more comfort in it. We need to ask ourselves all the time, what did I do to create a world that is safer for people who are hurting? Aside from what we're doing with ourselves to make sure that we're living a good lives, what are we doing to create safety for others? And the solution, the antidote to tragedy, which is a statement I know the Rebbe has said so many times, is that we need to become the opposite of the darkness. We need to bring forth the light. We need to become the solution. We don't live in that. The stories that are told of the Rebbe where he didn't cry so much in public. He said, I'll cry alone by myself at night. There's plenty of time to cry. But when we're awake and we're with other people, we focus on hope, we focus on light, we focus on the solution. And if anything we're trying to serve as the opposite to the problem. So if the problem is darkness, let's become the light. Abuse happens in the dark. That's always where it takes place. We reveal it. We talk about it openly. This is the solution. This is being. This is different. This is taking time from your very busy schedules to say, I want to hear something. I want to let people know that I'm there with them. Abuse quiets the world. It shuts us down. We run from it. And let's get loud. This is what we're doing. I was hearing about a podcast that Neshamos runs, which is a collection of stories of people who've triumphed. They've made their way through a great deal of struggle, and they've made their way to the other side. That's getting loud. That's revealing something. Abuse disconnects us, and it isolates us. We need to find a way to connect. We need to find a way to not run. It makes us feel small. It makes us feel broken, and we need to find a way to tap into our inner strength, our inner power, and allow us to become the solution. I just want to share one word before we end for the wounded, that you're not alone. Just take a moment to look around. You're really not alone. And there is a way. There's a way forth. This is not something that has to be a death sentence. It's not something, of course, it'll define one's life. There's no way for this to not define your life. But it doesn't have to define it in shame and suffering. It could define it with strength. Because on the inside, who we are, we're all connected to each other. We're all connected to Hashem. We're beautiful. We're light people. We're deserving of a life that provides us with some degree of comfort. And I assure you that people get there. It's a long road. It's not a simple road. But you get there. You find a way to share your voice and allow it to be heard. And give it a chance. I have a mirror in my office where I practice. And to me, that becomes the ultimate symbol of health. Could you stare yourself in the face? And one thing that I've noticed is one particular client that I work with, that it's been, I think, 3 or 4 years since he's been able to look in a mirror. He can't look at his own reflection because he's terrified of what he sees staring back at him. And I work in an office where there's an elevator, and most of my clients are sent up. The front desk will say, it's time, go up. With this particular client, I told him when he comes, please don't send him up, just call me, and I want to come down. Because in the elevator, it's surrounded by mirrors. And every time we're in that elevator together, we ask that question, like maybe today it's okay to look at your own reflection, to realize, to see what I see, to see what the rest of the world sees. And that's a bit of the tragedy, is that so many of these people who've been hurting, they actually live beautiful lives on the outside. They do good things, but they don't connect with it. So we see it and we just move on. They're numbing and we're just moving on with our lives. And our ability to look at ourselves, to give it a chance, and give ourselves some hope by saying we could make our way out to that place where we could discover ourselves. And we're trying our best. And tonight we're bringing some goodness into the world. We need to listen. We need to speak. We need to be certainly willing to hear what they say. And I just want to give us all a bracha that we find within ourselves, within our own families, comfort and peace and happiness and serenity and a sense of fearlessness, where we say, I'm giving myself a chance to live really well, to live wholesomely and alive. And we can't do that if we're alone. There's just no way to do that. We need to find a way to incorporate someone else into that space. And it's a great honor to share this space with you all. Thank you for being here. Thank you for showing your support. And thank you for bringing light into the world. Thank you.
One, two. Thank you very much, Doctor. We have quite a few questions here, and I'm going to stay here on my chair where it's really comfortable and let you stay in the spotlight.
All right.
Now, we got so many questions that it's going to be impossible for us to get through all of them, and we also don't have that much time for question answer. So I don't know what to tell you. I don't know if you should take 2 or 3 questions and address them at length, or...
I think that's a good idea. Let's maybe 2 or 3.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'll start with the first one I got here, because there's quite a few that are along the same lines of this. And the question is, what is the actual view we should have towards predators? What is the correct way to deal with them? So that's the first question that was asked, but there's a couple of different variations of the question, including what if that predator was molested or abused himself?
Yeah.
Is it possible to heal,
right,
and to become a functioning, responsible member of society? So again, what's our view towards predators? Is it compassion? Is it hate? Do you want to punch them in the face? What is it?
Yes. If it's okay with you, and this may not be appreciated, but I really feel that this is an evening for survivors. And I appreciate the question, and it's a very common question. I think there's a tremendous amount of curiosity and our desire to help people. Perpetrators, obviously there are many different variations of that, and it's a long story that we need to take place, that we need to discuss. I just feel like in an evening like tonight, where we're so deeply trying to honor people who are surviving this, it's probably, for me, I don't feel very comfortable spending that time speaking so much about the perpetrators. And they are their own story, and I think there does need to be a place and a forum to discuss how to treat that, especially the victim-perpetrator pathology, which is a fairly common one. But I really feel like it doesn't feel right to me in this moment to indulge in that question, if that's okay.
Absolutely. Thank you. And point taken. Thank you for pointing that out and for highlighting that. One correction that has to be made. Before, when I was emceeing, I mentioned the JCW as a website that doesn't seem to any longer be functioning. I was 100% wrong, and I stand here to correct the record. And that is, JCW isn't just a website, it's a functioning organization, and they're absolutely up and running. And we thank them and for the work they continue to do, and apologies for my misinformed statement.
Yeah.
Okay, we got a few variations of this question, and I guess only a survivor could ask this, because I don't quite get the question. And the question is, what exactly is considered sexual abuse? Is it kissing? Is it touching? Is it looking? Does it have to be extreme?
Yeah.
What exactly is
It doesn't-
sexual abuse?
There's a crazy thing that we don't often pay attention to. Most of us, we equate the level of suffering to what we believe to be the severity of the crime. And what we've discovered after years of looking at this is that it's largely an inaccurate statement. That for one person could experience something that we on the outside might say, oh, that's a minor offense. That's a minor violation. Yet that individual could suffer profoundly from that because there are other factors that contribute to it. So abuse in general is defined by a violation of self and space, generally also including some form of power differential. Power differential could be a boss, it could be someone older, it could be someone who's in a state of power over you, where you don't really have the ability to defend yourself. And that includes anything. Any form of behavior that meets that criteria is considered in a sexual manner, is considered sexual abuse. And I think it's important to notice this, that we have, again, our own minds, we're trying to make sense of a dark phenomenon. So to us, we're going to do whatever we possibly can to either justify something, make sense of something. So when something in our own mind seems minor, we tend to say, attribute to that, there should be a minor reaction. And again, it's simply a misunderstanding of the phenomenon, which is when someone touches a part of you that is essential to your being and disgraces it and makes it feel small, that's not minor in any respect. There's no such thing as that phenomenon being minor. Any variation of that is something that could be harmful. And we've known people who've externally suffered a great deal. We look at it and say that's a phenomenon that would destroy anybody, who have a form of resilience in them that it doesn't seem to face them the same way. So the way we respond to these experiences, generally speaking, is related to many other factors of our life, not just that moment. If you have self, you have resilience, you have a support network. In reality, you're probably going to be better off than a person who does not. The reaction is going to be different.
Thank you. Next question is, in a large family, it looks like there's a lot of detail here, so I'm going to assume someone's asking this question from personal experience. A large family with many siblings, one of the siblings have been molested, by another sibling, that is. Others touched inappropriately, but the person is afraid to bring it up because they don't want to break up the family, and especially because of the pain it would bring to the parents to have a broken family that would never be able to be brought together again. What is done in such a situation where there's a fear not necessarily of the predator, but of a side issue, which is they don't want to lose another thing. They don't want to lose their family.
Well, I just want to start by saying that there are ways to do this. It doesn't have to break up a family. We just need to know that if this is done sensitively and correctly, it doesn't have to destroy a family. There are many families that I've been a part of their journey where there was this. It's a fairly common phenomenon, certainly in our community, where there's not a lot of education about these things and people are acting on impulses, where older siblings and younger siblings, there are many families that make their way through that with their parents' involvement. And the one thing I just want to say to anyone here, a survivor, a victim, that your life is worth it. You need to start thinking for yourself and your own needs. It's not just about taking care of everybody else. You were supposed to be protected. This wasn't your fault. And someone else took advantage of you. And it's okay for you to stand up and protect yourself now and say, my needs, my feelings, my personhood is worth speaking up for itself. And empower yourself to do that. A part of this whole process, even the question itself, is the person is saying, like, I don't necessarily feel like my own well-being is good enough to challenge this whole system. And if they really believe that this is something that I need to deal with and I'm entitled to deal with, then do it well, do it sensitively. There is a way to do this. And many, many families that older siblings, younger siblings, learning to make amends with one another, learning to explain what they've done and apologize for what they've done and create safety within that home. And I could share many, many stories about that, literally where the younger sibling, when they see the older sibling who had harmed them in one way or another, they're not activated by their presence anymore because it's being dealt with and it's being discussed and worked through. and give ourselves a chance. I think that the story that most survivors live with is that if I were to emerge, it's going to be knocked down. And there's a reason why they live with that, because most of the time, we saw this. Look at the situation that just happened. Most of the time when someone comes forward with strength, we as a population, as people, we simply shut them down over and over again. So it makes sense. But the world is getting a little bit safer. And give yourself a chance. Maybe that doesn't mean go out right away to everybody, but find one safe person, and then maybe find another safe person, and start that journey of healing, and you could get there, even in a situation like this.
I'm going to ask another variation of this question. Yeah. And the reason I'm doing it is because it's coming from a Rav that people are familiar with, who has decades of experience with communities. And I think it's fascinating that he's asking the question, and probably a question that a lot of Rabbanim and leaders deal with. He says like this: I have a situation where I've been informed by a number of victims about a person who has a position of authority and power in the frum community. They told me his name and the terrible acts that he has done. However, none of them are willing to come forward, and I have no doubt he will continue. What can be done? And he finishes off, at the back of my mind, I'm concerned because I know of the valid accusation that rabbis knew about some of the molestation and didn't do anything about it. And I feel that maybe I'm perpetuating this thing is right over here. I know about something and I'm not doing anything about it, and they're not willing to come forward. What would you say?
Well, I think if you're a leader in a community and you know something, then you're responsible. Do something. This is an individual, we know this, not everybody continues. Not everybody continues to perpetrate their entire lives. There's certain people that they perpetrated in the past, and they've made their way to that next stage. But we don't know. And this community leader knows. He's aware. And there's a mandate to some degree. It's not just, like, let's not only rely on the victims and the survivors to say, I need you to have the strength to come forward. They'll find the strength to come forward. But he knows that there's a person in a position that could potentially be harmful to others. That's a mandate in and of itself. And by the way, legally there's a mandate, aside from anything else. But forget about the law for a moment. He's aware of an individual who is harming other people, or potentially is harming other people. Why should we have to wait for a victim to develop the strength? It could take victims a lifetime to face a perpetrator, especially one of prominence and position. They're much more intimidating. They're frightening. This is what, unfortunately, what Walter did. He intimidated everybody. People came forward. People knew about this in advance. Besdin knew about it 20 years. The devastation that was caused by their inability to react is a real problem. And they carried that. They carried that with them. So I think waiting for victims to say, I need you to have the strength to come forward. If there's enough people, he now knows the truth. And we need to know this. There's, aside from, let's say, divorce situations where parents are fighting for their children and their rights, very, very, very few cases. You're talking about, in research-wise, around 99% of cases that people come forward that's not involved in one of these he said, she said with a divorce situation tends to be the truth. So if there's a person who knows that you have a collection of people that have shared their story with him, and they're not ready yet to share their story publicly, that doesn't take away from the danger of that person in power. The person is still a danger. And we need to do something about it. We simply do.
Thank you. I've been asked to ask this question next by the organizers here, and that is, at what age do we begin to educate our children about sexual abuse and make them aware of the issues and the problems and being aware of it?
It's a different discussion, and we need to have that discussion. But we need to know that sexual abuse education starts at a very young age. We just don't call it sexual abuse education. We call it boundaries, we call it privacy, we call it other things, but it's something that starts at a very young age. When you're giving your child, once he understands the idea of wearing, undergarments, underwear, he can understand the idea of some degree of privacy. And it's that where we start the conversations. This is private, this is special, unique for you, the parents and the doctor. And that's a conversation you have with 3- and 4-year-olds. And there's no mention of sexual abuse. We do not want to frighten children. We don't want to create a world that's not safe for children. We want them to feel like they can walk around. But that is, I think it's a topic that we need to discuss at a certain point. What are the stages of education, and when do you start implementing different types of dialogue? Okay, let's take maybe one more, or...
Well, I'll just have the one I have open in front of me. I'm a survivor, but can't afford therapy and cannot ask my family for help. They won't understand me or support me. I tried a clinic, but didn't feel like the person really helped at all. How can I get help?
I believe we have a representative from ASAP here who put together, it's a beautiful program. Thankfully, we live in a community that provides funds for people who can't afford it. ASAP is one, Amudim, they also have a fund for this as well. I'm sure Relief has some type of fund. You have the larger organizations that have the ability to provide funding for people who need that help, and especially when it comes to survivors. We have several funds that are available. And again, there are certain clinics, not every one, where you could really find the right person who could provide you with that type of work. But you need to know that you're going into a clinic that is familiar with real trauma work. All right?
Thank you very much.
Okay,
Dr.
thank you,
Pearlman.
everybody.
Thank you, Dr. Pearlman. That was extremely informative and educational. And we appreciate you taking the time to educate us, to answer our questions, and to help provide the care and for our community and for the people who have come here to support those, again, who are suffering, and support those who would like to help those who have been suffering. We were going to have Avremi Zippel, a shliach, son of a shliach, who would have been a fascinating insight today, but as we mentioned earlier, due to an emergency circumstance, he was not able to make it today. So we'd like to finish off the program by inviting Meir Nu to say a couple of words. Meir works for Neshamos. He is the program director, and he does a lot of back-end work helping with anybody who really needs any form, not just of helpful sexual abuse, but with any mental illnesses or emotional issues. And he's just been somebody who's been able to help coordinate, to help connect people, and get survivors and people who need help to resources. So once again, Meir Nu. What was that? They're asking if you have a phone number, and you'll please share that. And once again, I think we're basically finished the evening after Meir speaks. So again, thank you very much to Meir for putting this together with his wife, Chaviva.
Speech notes? No. Hi, everybody. My name is Meir Nu, and thank you all for coming. It's really, really an honor, and I'm very humbled to be standing here before you. Before I started, I wanted to say a couple of thank yous to the people that were part of putting this event together. Number one, Dr. and Mrs. Rosen, who've always been there for us and constantly are interested and completely involved in all the work of Neshamos. They've been there for me and Akiva for quite some time now, and we're very appreciative for them. We know you're watching. I also wanted to thank Moshe Khan, who's here with us tonight. He is our podcast host and has brought tremendous healing to the world. One of the things which is probably the most devastating effect of all mental illness, and especially when it comes to sexual abuse, is the isolation that a person feels. And Moshe Khan has done tremendous work in helping dissipate that isolation by helping people share their stories so that anyone around the world really can listen in and feel like they're not alone and that there is somebody out there that understands them, and all they have to do is reach out. So thank you very much, Moshe, for all your work. And Moshe also does coaching, private coaching. You can reach out to him. Fantastic coach. I wanted to thank Avrami Tzipel for all of the work that he put into making this event happen. Unfortunately, he wasn't able to make it for tonight's event. And we just wanted to thank him for all the healing that he will bring to the world. Also, just quickly, just to mention the other people that are working with us on Neshamos, to Moshe Feiglin and Mushki Gurevich, and also Esther Guppin, who did a lot of good work for us. And also, this event is partially in memory of Rabbi Daniel Levy, who was a member of our Neshamos board, who passed away recently due to COVID. So may this event and all of the effects that this event has be a memory and a good schus for him and his family. Also want to thank Dovi Abrams for putting together the audio-visual for the event, and of course Menachem Freeman and Vod Printing for working with us to provide the resources and the handout materials, which hopefully you all took. Very important, very pertinent. And take them and also bring them home and give them out to whoever you know. I wanted to just say a couple of words about a certain question that I heard many times asked to me and asked to other people around me, which is sexual abuse. Is this a new thing? Like, why is this just coming up? Has this been happening for years? Like, what's going on? Why now? What's going on now? And I just wanted to present a viewpoint, which is my personal viewpoint. Either you can accept it, or you can just not. But I just wanted to put it out there and maybe help you understand why I feel and I find this to be an extremely important topic, and not just an important topic, but maybe the topic that we have to be speaking about. And so to do that, I want to tell you a story, which you may or may not be familiar with. You probably are. It happened many, many, many years ago, probably as many as there are years. There lived a woman. She was the most beautiful woman ever. She was pristine. She was pure. And her beauty was so attractive that it caught the eye of a lowly serpent. He was conniving and he was cunning. And the serpent, he took her for himself and he took advantage of her. The Medrash tells us that when the Nachash seduced Chava to eat from the Eitz Hadas, he in fact sexually abused her. He raped her. And by doing so, he put his filth in her and all of her children for all generations to come. Let that sink in for a minute. As a result of Chet Eitz Hadas, the way we call it, we are told that the Shekhinah, presence, holy presence, being present in a moment, in any moment, departed from its body. The Shekhinah left this world. The world was its body, and it departed. Now, I don't know how many of you are survivors of abuse or have spoken to survivors of abuse, but I can imagine that a great number of you are. And in your conversations with survivors, it's not an uncommon phenomena to hear them talk about how They had an out-of-body experience, dissociation, feeling out of place, a stranger in their own skin. That's what happened, and that's what happens. That's what happened by Chet Itzadas the first time this happened, and that's what continues to happen till today. The Nachash saw Chava as an object. As Kivi Pearlman was saying before, Dr. Pearlman, the Nachash HaKadmoni saw Chava as an object for his gratification. He reduced her to that. He didn't see her as a person. He didn't see her for her thoughts. He didn't see her for her feelings. He didn't see her for her aspirations. He didn't see her for her destiny. He didn't see the fact that she was the mother of all mankind. He didn't see any of that. All he saw was, this is something that I can get gratification from. And by doing what he did, he taught Chava to see herself exactly as that. He taught her to see herself as an object. He taught her to forget how important she was and how special she was. And by doing that, he also taught every single one of us how to do that to ourselves, how to see ourselves for something other than our innate beauty and the pristine purity that we actually are. Who here hasn't struggled with questions about their own purpose? Who here hasn't struggled with questions about their own self-worth? The Rebbe has told us that we are the generation to usher in the coming of Mashiach, to bring about Hashem's final presence within his body, within this body of his. Right here, right now. It's no coincidence that the matter of sexual abuse is for us, Der Hashvi, to face. And so, standing here on Purim Katan, Tafshin Pei Beis, it is our honor and our privilege to be finally completing the work of all the generations before us. We can do this. We can do this by acknowledging within ourselves, notwithstanding all the abuses and traumas that we each and every one of us here has suffered, we can acknowledge our own beauty, our own self-worth, our neshama, that our existence, in the words of the Rebbe, the etzem Faranenkeit von Ayid, is a tainug l'mayla. I'm paraphrasing, but it's something along those lines. That the mere existence, our mere existence, your mere existence is a blissful pleasure for the Eibishter. And we can combat the effects of abuse by acknowledging that within ourselves and reminding ourselves about that. We can do this, and even more so, we are doing this. Oh, that was it. Just a few housekeeping notes. That was, wow, okay. So just to recap from this event, we spoke about knowing the effects of abuse and educating ourselves about what it is that a survivor goes through. And the people who are here tonight are clearly, if you want to say the choir, each and every one of us over here has brushed up against abuse, either directly, first person, second person. It's our job to go outside and make sure that everybody understands the importance of this topic, that everybody understands how deeply this affects the people all the people who are involved. We are the advocates. We are the ones that are going to be pushing this message, making sure that everybody else knows them. So number one, the awareness is extremely important. What do we do now? We get aware. We make other people aware. When people are aware of their actions, when people are aware of what's taking place, that is the biggest stalwart to prevent people from doing bad things when they understand how bad it is. Just about a couple of resources that I wanted to mention. So first of all, Neshamos has a helpline. The number is actually the same number to text. You can call it, and one of our representatives, or myself, or my wife, or the other people that work on it will, take the call. So 646-580-9842. 646-580-9842. There's also a number of support groups for victims of sexual abuse. There's support groups for women, anonymous support groups. They're in person or virtual. There's both of them. You can find out about them. There's an organization called Ray of Hope. I think there is a woman here, Zeldy Braun, who heads the organization. You can seek her out and speak to her about it. We are looking to set up a men's support group, an anonymous support group. Please reach out to us on Neshamos if you're interested in joining such a group. Another resource which is available is the Companion Network, which Neshamos has, which peers people who've been through a mental health struggle together, with any mental health struggle, together with somebody who's going through it at the time, just as a support, a listening ear, a caring heart who can understand and be there for the other person completely and fully. Sorry? For the Companion Network, it's actually off on the Neshamos website. It's neshamos.org/companions. You can sign up to be for a mentor, for a companion. Like Dr. Pearlman mentioned, ASAP funding has done tremendous work and still does tremendous work in providing funding for victims of sexual abuse. It's really incredible what they're able to provide to our community, and it's something that people should know about and use. There was a question about what it is that people, like if somebody has flashbacks and is not sure about their abuse or doesn't know, has like doubts about whether anything happened, there are therapies that people can do in order to discover more about what might have happened. EMDR is particularly good with a skilled practitioner. So is somatic therapy. Those are two specific therapies that can really help somebody. Also trauma-focused CBT. Those are therapies that you can look to and find, and you can call the Neshamos helpline. Will help you connect you to such people who can help you understand and discover, or who can help a person understand and discover if anything happened to them. Obviously, we don't have to go picking and searching, maybe this and that, but if somebody has, ideas or thoughts, that's the way to go. And on that note, I want to thank you all again for coming out. Happy Purim Katan. And I just wanted to read to you a message that I got from my shviger. I will read the beginning because it's long. Purim Katan, Monday night, yeah. Tzaddikim say that the light of Purim Katan, the small Purim, is brought upon all those who feel small in the sense that they need a Yeshua. Those who feel little because they are lacking something. Purim itself is the biggest day of the year to have our prayers answered. Purim Katan is a big and auspicious day as well. May we all merit to have our prayers answered, and may we all merit to stand up to this obligation and this task and this honor to bring home the final redemption, to end this chapter, this long chapter, once and for all, with the coming of Mashiach. Meher v'yameinu. Thank you for coming. And don't forget to take the handouts.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. If I may indulge your attention for just one more moment, and we'll just, as we close off the evening. A lot of topics were discussed tonight which have a bit of a dark feel, a little bit depressing, very sad, scary. And if anybody walks out of today's event feeling any of those emotions, fear, depression, darkness, then we haven't done our job here tonight.
The way that the Rebbe would look at this is that every darkness is an opportunity for light, and that's the way that we should be looking at this, that the entire idea that we can deal with sexual abuse should be looked at in a positive way. It's a way that we can improve ourselves, it's a way that we can improve our communities, and a way to improve our world as well. And the same thing for those who are unfortunate enough to be survivors. Always remember that, of course, Hashem has given us challenges, but the challenge is a source of light. It's something we're talking about in Tanya now, that darkness is always an opportunity for light, for goodness, for bringing happiness, for bringing greatness, for bringing Mashiach. And so if there's one message that we should walk away with today, it's about bringing positivity, bringing health, bringing healing, bringing light, bringing goodness, bringing the Rebbe back, and bringing Mashiach ultimately. Thank you very much for coming.